When you're setting up a FileMaker system, some of the choices you get to make will have significant impact on usability, especially when it comes to the task of data entry. In earlier lessons, when I was setting up some of the fields in the data structure of the work files, you saw me creating the serial number and ID fields and selecting auto entry options to generate field values automatically. In fact, there are quite a few situations when auto entry options can come into play to speed or simplify data entry tasks. Essentially, in any case where a field could have a default value, then rather than requiring the user to enter the value repetitively on every record, you can set the field to automatically populate with the default value. So the user need only take action in those cases where the default isn't appropriate. Assuming the default value applies in 50% or more of cases, doing this potentially halves the data entry workload for that particular field. Even if the default value is appropriate for fewer than 50% of cases, it may still be worth the small amount of effort to set up an auto-enter option for the ongoing saved effort during data entry. And beyond default values, there are quite a few other options for auto-entry of values into fields in FileMaker. So let's take a slightly closer look at the data entry options FileMaker provides. First of all, here in the Publications layout, I'll go into Manage Database. And on the Fields tab, you can see the serial number and publication ID fields, which indicate in the Options and Comments area that they have an auto-enter option enabled. When I double-click, say, on the Publication ID field, the Auto-Enter tab of the Options for Field dialog shows a whole range of auto-entry options. The first couple of options allow entry of dates and times, the creation date, time, timestamp, or also the creation name or account name. What that means is the field can be set to automatically acquire some information at the point when the record is created about either the date or time, or about the workstation or the logged-in user at the point of creation of a record. And the same thing for the time of modification of a record. So in the case of a modification date, each time a record is modified, a field with this particular auto-enter option will acquire the current date from the system clock. Below the creation and modification dates are the options for serial numbers, which we've looked at previously. Then there are a couple of other interesting options. Value from last visited record allows you to have the user navigating through a number of records, and when they create a new record, the value from the record that they're currently looking at will be placed into the field that has this particular auto-enter option enabled. The fifth option here, data, is the option you would use to set a default value for a field. So when you select that option, into the adjacent text box, you get to enter the specific piece of information that will be the default value for the field. So in every new record, that particular value will be entered into the field automatically. Then we have calculated value, which is the system that I used to create the publication ID values. And last but not least, looked up value, which allows you to have FileMaker find a value in a related table based on a match between some values in other fields. And that's something that you would use, for example, to look up the state value that corresponds to a postcode. That is, when the user enters the value in the postcode field, the state field might then have a looked up value auto-enter option applied so that it can bring across the value from a reference table that has states and postcodes, or zip codes if you like. I'll just cancel the auto-enter options for the publication ID field, and by way of example, I'll create a new field in the database. I'm going to create a field called Availability. It'll be a text field, and it's a field in which we can indicate whether a particular publication is available or out of print. Now, when I click the Options button, we get to specify a default value for the Availability field. And let's suppose that we would assume most of the publications we'd be entering into the Publications table will be available. So the default value for the field will be available, which means that with this data entry option enabled, we're now only going to need to enter any value into the availability field for those books that are out of print, and we'll have to overwrite the default value of available on those records. But for most of the records, we won't need to do that because the default value will kick in and will save us the trouble. So now that I've added a field with a default auto-enter option applied, let's go and look at that working in the database. First of all, I'll go to Layout mode, and I'm going to add the availability field to the layout. I'll select the field, and FileMaker automatically creates a field label. I'll make the field box a little wider. Now, back in Browse mode, I'll create a new record. I'll select the New Record command from the Records menu. And as you can see, not only has FileMaker generated a serial number and an ID for the new publication record, but it's also pre-populated the availability field with the default value of available.